Jake Morgan pushed his mop across the gleaming marble floors of the Imperial Palace, humming an old tune his mother used to sing back on Earth. The palace was enormous, stretching up toward the purple sky of the Sar Prime like a mountain made of crystal and silver. Tonight it was hosting some kind of big diplomatic summit, which meant aliens from all over the galaxy were wandering through the halls in their fancy robes and uniforms. Jake didn't mind. He'd been working as a janitor here for 6 months now, and he'd learned that politicians and ambassadors made the same messes as everyone else. The grand ballroom was just ahead, its massive doors thrown open for preparations. Jake could hear music drifting out, the strange but beautiful melodies that the Thesserans loved. He peeked inside as he worked, watching servants arrange elaborate flower displays that seemed to glow from within. The Thesserans themselves were practicing some kind of traditional dance, their movements perfectly synchronized. They were tall and graceful, with skin that looked like it had been carved from precious stones. Everything about them screamed perfection. That's when Jake noticed her sitting off to the side, almost hidden behind one of the ornate pillars. She was young, maybe 16 or 17, with the same crystalline skin as the other Thesserans. But unlike the dancers who moved with such confidence, this girl sat completely still in what looked like a floating wheelchair. Her hoverchair made a soft humming sound that Jake could barely hear over the music. What really caught his attention was the look on her face as she watched the dancers. It was pure longing, the kind of expression that spoke of dreams that felt impossible. Jake had seen that look before. His little sister Amy used to watch kids playing soccer with that same expression before the disease took her ability to walk. The memory still hurt, even after all these years. He altered his mopping path to bring him closer to the girl. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on the dancers spinning and leaping across the polished floor. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jake said, not wanting to startle her but loud enough to be heard over the music. "The way they move, I mean." The girl's head whipped around, her violet eyes going wide with surprise. Up close, Jake could see she was even younger than he'd thought. "You're the human janitor," she said, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief, like she couldn't quite figure out why he was talking to her. "That's me. Jake Morgan, professional floor cleaner and occasional conversationalist." He gave her a friendly smile and leaned casually on his mop. "And you are?" She hesitated, like she wasn't used to people asking. "Princess Lyra." "Well, Princess, you look like you were enjoying the show. Those dancers are pretty incredible." Lyra's expression darkened, and she glanced down at her hoverchair. "I don't dance. I can't." Now that Jake was closer, he could see what she meant. Her legs were thin and withered, clearly unable to support her weight. Among these tall, perfect aliens, her disability must have marked her as fundamentally different. Probably not in a good way, judging by how she'd been sitting alone while everyone else bustled around preparing for the ceremony. "Says who?" Jake asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Lyra looked up at him like he'd just said something in a language she didn't understand. "Everyone. I was born this way. In Thesseran culture, physical perfection is everything. We're supposed to be flawless, strong, beautiful. I'm none of those things. My condition is considered shameful." Jake felt that old familiar anger rising in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when kids made fun of Amy, when doctors talked about her like she was already gone, when people treated her disability like it made her less human. He took a breath and knelt down beside Lyra's chair so they were at eye level. "You know what I think? I think that's complete nonsense. Where I come from, we've learned something important over the years. Everyone can dance. It's not about whether you have working legs or perfect form. It's about expressing yourself, about feeling the music in your heart and letting it move you however it can. Dance is for everyone who wants to do it, not just people who fit some narrow definition of perfect." Lyra stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You're serious? You really believe that?" "Absolutely serious. I've seen dancers on Earth who perform in wheelchairs, who've lost limbs, who were born different just like you. And they're amazing because they dance with passion and creativity and heart. Your legs don't dance, Princess. You do." For the first time since he'd started talking to her, something changed in Lyra's expression. The sadness didn't disappear, but hope flickered there too, fragile as a candle flame. "I've never thought about it that way. No one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Well, maybe it's time someone did." Jake stood up, making a decision that would change both their lives. "Want me to show you? Teach you some moves? I'm no professional, but I know enough to get you started." Lyra's hands trembled slightly as they gripped the arms of her hoverchair. "You would do that? For me?" "Why not? My shift ends in an hour, and I've got nothing better to do than help a princess learn to dance. What do you say? The smile that spread across Lyra's face was like watching the sun come out after a storm. Yes. Please, yes. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the upper gallery. Empress Valindra stood perfectly still, her face unreadable as she observed the human janitor kneeling beside her granddaughter. She had come to inspect the ceremony preparations, but this unexpected scene had captured her attention completely. The Empress had written Lyra off years ago as an unfortunate reminder of imperfection in an otherwise flawless bloodline. She tolerated the girl out of duty, but never expected anything from her. Certainly never expected to see her smile like that. And this human, this lowly maintenance worker, had accomplished in 5 minutes what decades of royal tutors and caregivers had never managed. He'd given Lyra hope. Valindra's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Hope could be dangerous. It could lead to disappointment, to embarrassment, to challenges against traditions that had stood for thousands of years. But as she watched Lyra's face light up with possibilities, the Empress felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Curiosity. She turned silently and walked away, her ceremonial robes whispering across the polished stone. The human janitor and her forgotten granddaughter had no idea they were being watched. They had no idea they just set in motion events that would challenge an entire empire's understanding of worth and perfection. But the Empress knew. And despite herself, despite every political instinct screaming that this was a complication she didn't need, Valindra found herself wanting to see what would happen next. Jake's official shift ended at midnight, but for the past week he'd been sneaking back into the palace every night around 1 in the morning. The security guards had gotten used to seeing him, and he'd spun them a story about needing to finish cleaning the ballroom after the evening events. They'd bought it without question. After all, who pays attention to a janitor? The grand ballroom was a different place in the dead of night. All the politicians and dignitaries were asleep in their quarters, and the servants had finished their work hours ago. The massive space stood empty and quiet, lit only by the soft glow of bioluminescent crystals embedded in the walls. It was perfect. Lyra was already waiting when Jake arrived, her hoverchair positioned near the center of the polished floor. She looked nervous and excited at the same time, fidgeting with the fabric of her dress. "You came back," she said, like she'd half expected him not to show up. "Course I did. Made a promise, didn't I?" Jake set down his cleaning supplies in the corner and walked over to her. "Ready for lesson number 2? "I've been practicing what you showed me yesterday," Lyra said eagerly. She raised her arms and moved them in the graceful arcs Jake had demonstrated the night before. The movements were still a bit stiff, but she'd clearly been working on them. "Hey, that's great. You've got the basic idea. But you're thinking too hard about it. Here's the thing about dancing that most people don't understand. It's not a math equation you have to solve. It's more like having a conversation with the music." Jake pulled out his personal music player, a battered old device from Earth that had survived 3 different planets with him. "Let me show you something." He pressed play, and soft music filled the enormous ballroom. It was an old jazz piece, something with a slow, swaying rhythm that seemed to echo off the crystal walls in interesting ways. "Close your eyes," Jake instructed. "Just listen for a minute. Don't think about moving, just feel the rhythm." Lyra closed her eyes, and Jake watched her face relax as she let the music wash over her. Her head started to move slightly, unconsciously following the beat. "There you go. You feel that? That's the music talking to you. Now, without opening your eyes, just let your hands respond to what you're hearing." Lyra's hands began to move, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. They flowed through the air like birds riding invisible currents, naturally following the rise and fall of the melody. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked surprised at herself. "I wasn't thinking about it at all. It just happened." "Exactly. That's what dance is supposed to be. It's your body having a conversation with sound." Jake grinned and started demonstrating more movements. "Now, let's talk about your chair. Most people would see it as a limitation, right? But I see it as a dance partner." Over the next hour, Jake showed Lyra how to use her hoverchair as part of her dancing. He taught her how to spin it in tight circles, how to make it glide smoothly in patterns across the floor, how to use its movement to add drama and flow to her arm movements. The chair's controls were sensitive enough that she could make it respond to the rhythm of the music. "In my world," Jake said during a break while Lyra caught her breath, "we have these amazing athletes called Paralympic competitors. They're people who were born different or got injured, but they didn't let that stop them from being incredible. Wheelchair basketball players who could run circles around regular players. Dancers who perform in chairs and do things that would blow your mind. Runners who race on prosthetic legs and break records. Lyra listened intently, hunger for these stories clear in her expression. But how? How did they go from being seen as broken to being celebrated? People fought for it. They refused to accept the world's definition of what they could or couldn't do. They showed up, they competed, they performed, and they proved everyone wrong. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But slowly, people started to understand that having a disability doesn't make you less capable. It just means you do things differently. Thessaran culture doesn't see it that way, Lyra said quietly, and Jake heard the pain in her voice. We're taught from birth that physical perfection is the highest virtue. Our greatest heroes are warriors and athletes. Our most respected leaders are those who display flawless strength. People like me are considered genetic failures. My grandmother, the Empress, she tolerates me because I'm family. But I'll never be allowed to inherit the throne. I'll never participate in royal ceremonies or represent our people. I've spent my whole life being hidden away during important events. Jake felt that familiar anger again, but he kept his voice calm. That's their failure, not yours. They're the ones who are broken if they can't see your value. There's this ceremony coming up, Lyra continued, speaking faster now like she needed to get the words out. The Starlight Festival. It's one of our most important cultural events. Every young person in the royal family performs a traditional dance. It's been that way for thousands of years. I've watched it from the shadows every year since I was a child, and every year I've been told I can't participate. That it would be inappropriate. Embarrassing. Jake could see where this was going, and part of him wanted to warn her about the backlash she'd face. But a bigger part of him, the part that remembered watching his sister Amy give up on her dreams because people told her she couldn't, that part wanted to encourage her to try. What if this year was different? He asked. What if you performed? Lyra's eyes went wide. They'd never allow it. The scandal alone would be enormous. My grandmother would be furious. Maybe. Or maybe it's time someone challenged these ancient rules. You've been practicing for a week now, and you're already good. Really good. With more time, you could put together something amazing. Something that would show everyone that dance isn't about having perfect legs. It's about having courage and heart. I'm scared, Lyra admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Being scared is okay. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you're afraid and you do it anyway. Jake pulled up a chair and sat down so they were at the same level again. My sister Amy, the one I told you about, she had this disease called muscular dystrophy. It slowly took away her ability to walk, to move, to do all the things she loved. And people treated her like she was already gone, like her life didn't matter anymore because her body didn't work the way it was supposed to. She died believing she was a burden. Jake's throat tightened, but he pushed through. I was young and stupid, and I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know how to fight for her the way she deserved. But I learned something from losing her. I learned that every single person has value, regardless of what their body can or can't do. And I swore I'd never stand by again when I saw someone being told they were less than they really are. Lyra reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you for telling me that. And thank you for seeing me as more than just a broken princess. You're not broken. You're perfect exactly as you are. High above in her private chambers, Empress Valindra sat in darkness, watching the scene unfold on her security monitors. She'd been observing these midnight sessions all week, telling herself it was merely prudent to keep track of what was happening in her palace. But the truth was more complicated. She watched her granddaughter laugh and spin and come alive in ways Valindra had never seen. She watched the human janitor treat Lyra with a respect and kindness that no Thessaran had ever shown her. And she thought about her brother, dead these 40 years, who had never been given a chance to prove his worth. The Empress's fingers drummed against the armrest of her chair. This situation was becoming complicated, potentially dangerous to long-held traditions. But she couldn't look away. Something was happening in that ballroom that felt important, like watching the first crack appear in a dam that had held back water for centuries. She would continue to watch. And when the time came, she would decide whether to let that dam break or reinforce it before everything came flooding through. Lyra had requested a formal audience with her grandmother, and the entire palace was buzzing with gossip about it. She hadn't spoken directly to the Empress in over 3 years, preferring to communicate through servants and advisors when absolutely necessary. Now she was about to walk into the throne room in front of the entire royal court and make a request that would either change everything or destroy what little standing she had left. Jake stood in the servants' corridor, watching through a side entrance as Lyra guided her hoverchair down the long aisle toward the throne. The room was massive, with ceilings that seemed to stretch up forever and walls covered in precious metals that reflected light in dizzying patterns. Dozens of courtiers and nobles lined both sides, their crystalline faces showing everything from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. He wanted to be in there with her, but Lyra had insisted she needed to do this part alone. All Jake could do was watch and hope. Empress Valindra sat on her throne like a statue carved from ice. She wore ceremonial robes that seemed to shimmer with their own light, and a crown that looked too heavy for any normal person to wear. Her face showed absolutely nothing as she watched her granddaughter approach. "You have requested an audience, Princess Lyra," the Empress said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the enormous space. "Speak." Lyra stopped her chair at the base of the throne platform. Jake could see her hands shaking slightly, but her voice came out clear and strong. "Grandmother, I wish to perform at the Starlight Festival. I have been learning to dance, and I believe I can honor our traditions while representing our family." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the court exploded. "Outrageous," one elderly advisor shouted, his face flushing a darker shade of violet. "The Starlight Festival has maintained its dignity for 3,000 years. This would be a mockery." "She cannot even stand," another noble said, not bothering to lower her voice. "How can she perform our traditional dances? It's impossible and insulting to suggest otherwise." A younger courtier actually laughed, the sound cruel and sharp. "This is what comes from allowing humans into the palace. They fill our youth with ridiculous ideas about equality and participation. Some beings are simply not meant for certain roles." Jake's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to march in there and tell them all exactly what he thought of their precious traditions. But this was Lyra's fight, and interrupting would only make things worse. Empress Valindra raised one hand, and the room fell silent immediately. She studied her granddaughter for a long moment, her expression still unreadable. "You say you have been learning to dance. From whom?" "From Jake Morgan, the human maintenance worker. He has been teaching me." More gasps and whispers rippled through the court. The same elderly advisor who'd spoken before stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this human has clearly overstepped his position. He mocks our culture by suggesting that our sacred dances can be performed by just anyone, regardless of physical capability. I move that he be removed from the palace immediately and banned from Thessaran space." "I second that motion," another voice called out. Valindra's eyes narrowed. "Bring the human to me." Two guards appeared at Jake's elbow before he could even process what was happening. They weren't rough, but they made it clear he didn't have a choice. He was escorted into the throne room, and suddenly every eye in the place was on him. Jake had faced dangerous situations before, had survived combat zones and hostile planets, but walking down that aisle with dozens of aliens staring at him with open hostility was one of the most intimidating things he'd ever done. He stopped beside Lyra's chair and looked up at the Empress. He didn't bow as low as the courtiers probably expected, but he showed respect. "You are the human who teaches my granddaughter to dance," Valindra said. It wasn't a question. "Yes? That's me." "Explain yourself. Why do you presume to instruct a Thessaran princess in our cultural traditions?" Jake took a breath. He could play this safe, apologize and back down, probably save his job and avoid getting deported. Or he could tell the truth and deal with whatever came after. He thought about Amy, about all the times people had told her what she couldn't do, and he made his choice. "With respect, Your Majesty, I don't presume anything. Princess Lyra wanted to learn to dance, and I showed her that she could. I'm not teaching her Thessaran traditions because honestly, I don't know them well enough. I'm teaching her that dance is about expression and emotion and connecting with music, and that those things don't require working legs. They require heart and courage, and your granddaughter has both in abundance." The court erupted again with angry voices, but Jake kept his eyes on the Empress. She held up her hand for silence once more. "You suggest that our culture's emphasis on physical perfection is wrong. I'm suggesting it's incomplete. Back on Earth, we used to think the same way. We used to hide people who were different, treat them like they were broken or shameful. And you know what? We were wrong. We were so busy looking for physical perfection that we missed out on incredible talents, brilliant minds, and amazing spirits. The strongest person I ever knew was my sister, and she couldn't walk. She taught me that strength comes in forms your culture doesn't seem to recognize." An advisor stepped forward, practically shaking with rage. "Your Majesty, this is intolerable. This human insults our entire civilization. He must be punished." But Empress Valindra stood up, and everyone fell silent. She descended from her throne, something Jake had been told she almost never did during formal audiences. She walked down the steps until she was standing directly in front of him and Lyra. "Clear the room," she commanded. "Everyone out. Now." The courtiers looked shocked, but they obeyed. Within minutes, the vast throne room was empty except for the Empress, Lyra, Jake, and 2 guards standing at the distant doors. Valindra's mask of imperial dignity cracked slightly, and Jake saw something unexpected in her eyes. Pain. Old pain that had never quite healed. "I had a brother," she said quietly. "His name was Kel. He was born with a condition similar to Lyra's. Our parents were horrified. In Thessaran culture at that time, such a thing in the royal family was considered a sign of divine disfavor. They removed him from the line of succession immediately. He was given comfortable quarters and every physical comfort, but he was never allowed to participate in royal functions. Never allowed to be seen in public. Never acknowledged as truly part of the family." She turned to look at Lyra, and Jake saw tears forming in the Empress's eyes, though she didn't let them fall. "Kel died when he was 23 years old. The doctors said it was his condition, but I knew better. He died because he'd given up. Because he'd spent his entire life being told he had no value, no purpose, no place in our society. And I did nothing. I was young and afraid of going against our parents, against tradition. I let him die believing he was worthless." The throne room was so quiet Jake could hear his own heartbeat. "I have carried that guilt every day for 60 years, Valindra continued. "When Lyra was born with a similar condition, I told myself I would not make the same mistake. But in truth, I simply found a different way to fail her. I allowed her to live in the palace, but I never fought for her to truly be part of our family, our culture, our traditions. I told myself I was being practical, protecting her from disappointment. But I was just a coward." She looked at Jake directly. "You, a human janitor who has been here mere months, have shown my granddaughter more genuine care and respect than I have in 16 years. You have given her something I could not. Hope." Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. Valindra turned back to Lyra. "You may perform at the Starlight Festival. But understand this, both of you. If you fail, if this becomes a spectacle that embarrasses our family and our traditions, there will be severe consequences. You will be banned from future ceremonies, and you," she looked at Jake, "will be removed from Thessaran space permanently. Do you accept these terms?" Lyra's voice shook but held firm. "I accept, grandmother." Jake nodded. "So do I, Your Majesty." The Empress studied them both for another long moment, then did something that shocked them both. She reached out and gently touched Lyra's cheek. "Then prove me wrong about what is possible. Show me that courage and heart matter more than perfect legs. I find myself hoping desperately that you succeed." The news of Lyra's approved performance spread through the palace like wildfire, and the reaction was about as pleasant as Jake had expected. Which is to say, not pleasant at all. Someone had painted the word inferior across his quarters door in bright red letters. Jake stared at it for a moment, then grabbed his cleaning supplies and scrubbed it off. He'd dealt with worse back on Earth. Words on a door weren't going to stop him. But the harassment didn't end there. Palace guards who'd previously nodded politely at him now accidentally knocked his mop bucket over as they passed, sending dirty water splashing across floors he just cleaned. Nobles made loud comments about humans not understanding their place whenever he was within earshot. One particularly nasty courtier had even filed a formal complaint claiming Jake had been stealing supplies, which led to an inspection of his quarters that found absolutely nothing because, of course, he hadn't stolen anything. Jake endured it all with the patience he'd learned from years of being underestimated. Let them talk. Let them scheme. It didn't matter. What mattered was helping Lyra prepare for the performance of her life. They'd increased their practice sessions to every night, sometimes going until 3 or 4 in the morning. The grand ballroom had become their sanctuary, the one place where the outside world's hostility couldn't quite reach them. "Higher with your left arm, then sweep it down on the 3rd beat," Jake called out, clapping the rhythm while Lyra executed a complex sequence of movements. Her hoverchair spun in a tight circle, and her arms flowed through the air like she was painting invisible pictures. "Yes. Exactly like that. You're getting so good at this." Lyra completed the sequence and paused, breathing hard. "Do you really think I can do this? In front of thousands of people? Half of them expecting me to fail?" "I know you can. I've seen how hard you've been working. But listen, the technical stuff is only part of it. What's going to make your performance special isn't perfect execution. It's emotion. It's telling a story that makes people feel something. Jake sat down on the floor beside her chair. What do you want to say with this dance? What story are you telling? Lyra thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. I want to show them that being different doesn't mean being less. That I can honor our traditions in my own way. That my life has value even if it doesn't look like theirs. Then that's what we focus on. Every movement, every expression on your face, every spin of your chair needs to communicate that message. We're not just putting on a show. We're changing minds. They worked on the emotional aspects of the performance, with Jake coaching her on facial expressions and how to use her eyes to connect with the audience. He showed her how to channel her feelings into her movements, how to make every gesture count. Meanwhile, the other young Thesserans scheduled to perform were getting increasingly vocal about their displeasure. A guy named Thorn, who was supposed to perform one of the traditional warrior dances, cornered Jake in a hallway one afternoon. You're making fools of all of us, Thorn said, his violet eyes cold with anger. The Starlight Festival is sacred. It celebrates physical excellence and cultural tradition. Letting Lyra perform degrades everything we stand for. Jake straightened up from his mopping and met Thorn's glare calmly. Funny, I thought it celebrated your culture and your people. Last I checked, Lyra is Thesseran. She's part of your culture whether you like it or not. She's a genetic failure. Her existence is an embarrassment. The words hit Jake like a punch, not because they hurt him, but because he knew how much they would hurt Lyra if she heard them. He took a step closer to Thorn, his voice dropping low and dangerous. You know what I see when I look at you? Someone so insecure in their own worth that they need to put others down to feel superior. Lyra has more courage in her little finger than you have in your whole perfect body. She's fighting for something that matters while you're just going through the motions of a dance you've done 100 times. So yeah, maybe you should be worried. Because even with all your physical advantages, she's going to outshine you. Thorn's face flushed darker, and for a second Jake thought the guy might actually take a swing at him. But instead, Thorn just sneered and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. The court officials weren't making things any easier. They'd scheduled Lyra for the very last performance slot of the entire ceremony, right after dozens of flawless traditional dances. The message was clear, they were setting her up to be a disappointing finale, hoping the pressure would make her withdraw or that her performance would suffer by comparison. But Jake and Lyra used it to their advantage. You're closing the show, Jake told her during one practice session. That means you're the last thing everyone will remember. That's actually a gift. We just need to make sure you leave them speechless. They worked on the music, creating a fusion that blended traditional Thesseran melodies with subtle influences from Earth. Jake had reached out to a musician friend back home who'd sent him some backing tracks that added depth and emotion without overwhelming the classical elements. The result was something unique, something that honored tradition while pushing it forward. The diplomatic delegations staying at the palace had caught wind of the controversy and were taking sides. Some alien ambassadors thought Lyra's inclusion was a wonderful step forward. Others agreed with the traditional Thesserans that it was inappropriate. The whole thing had become a political mess that extended far beyond one girl wanting to dance. One evening, about a week before the ceremony, Jake was finishing up his actual janitorial duties when he found a note slipped under his door. It was written in shaky handwriting and said simply, "The human is corrupting our youth. Leave now or face consequences." Jake crumpled up the note and tossed it in the trash. Anonymous threats from cowards didn't scare him. But the next night, things escalated. Jake arrived at the ballroom for practice to find Lyra in tears. Someone had tampered with her hoverchair's controls, causing it to malfunction and spin wildly out of control during her practice earlier that day. She'd crashed into a wall and bruised her shoulder badly. "They want me to quit," Lyra said, wiping her eyes. "They're trying to hurt me, to scare me into backing out." Jake felt rage burning in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Did you report it?" "What's the point? Half the palace staff supports whoever did this. They'll just claim it was an accident, a malfunction." She looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. "Maybe I should quit. Maybe this isn't worth it." Jake knelt beside her chair, the same way he had that first day in the ballroom. "You remember what I told you about my sister Amy? She had every reason to give up. Every doctor, every pitying look, every person who treated her like she was already dead. But you know what she told me once? She said that giving up was the only way they could truly beat her. As long as she kept fighting, kept living her life on her own terms, she won." "But she died," Lyra whispered. "Yeah, she did. And I'll regret forever that I didn't fight harder for her," didn't stand up to all those people who made her feel worthless. But you're still here, Lyra. You've still got a chance to prove them all wrong. And I promise you, I will be with you every step of the way. They want to scare you? Let's scare them right back by showing them what real courage looks like. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. Okay. We keep going. But we need to be more careful. And we need this performance to be absolutely perfect. Not perfect, Jake corrected. Real. Honest. True. That's better than perfect any day. They spent the next few nights refining every detail. Jake brought in extra security measures, checking Lyra's chair personally before each practice. They worked until their bodies ached, until Lyra's movements became second nature, until the performance lived in her muscles and her heart. 3 nights before the ceremony, something unexpected happened. Thorn, the same guy who'd confronted Jake in the hallway, showed up at the ballroom entrance during their practice. Jake immediately positioned himself between Thorn and Lyra, ready for trouble. But Thorn held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. I just want to watch. If that's okay. Jake and Lyra exchanged glances. Why? Lyra asked. Thorn's expression was complicated, shame and curiosity mixed together. Because I've been thinking about what you said, he looked at Jake. About going through the motions versus fighting for something that matters. And I saw what happened with Lyra's chair. That was wrong, and I want you to know I had nothing to do with it. Then who did? Jake demanded. I don't know for sure, but there are some courtiers who've been making plans, talking about preserving tradition at any cost. You both need to be careful. Lyra studied Thorn carefully. You can watch. But no criticism, no mockery. I wouldn't dream of it. Thorn stayed for the entire practice session, sitting quietly in the shadows. When they finished, he stood up and walked over. That was beautiful, he said simply. I didn't think it was possible, but you've created something genuinely special. The grand ballroom had been transformed into something out of a dream. Thousands of bioluminescent crystals hung from the ceiling, casting soft light that shifted through every color imaginable. The walls had been draped in ceremonial fabrics that seemed to shimmer and flow like water. Every seat was filled with Thessaran nobles, alien dignitaries, and representatives from dozens of worlds across the galaxy. The air practically hummed with anticipation and expensive perfumes. Jake stood backstage with Lyra, and he could feel her trembling. They'd watched performance after performance, each one a masterpiece of technical precision. Young Thessarans executed traditional dances with movements so perfect they looked almost mechanical. The audience applauded politely after each one, appreciating the skill but never seeming truly moved by what they were seeing. They're all so flawless, Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. Look at them, Jake. Perfect posture, perfect timing, perfect everything. What am I doing? I can't compete with that. Jake turned her chair so she was facing him instead of the stage. You're right. You can't compete with that. But you know what? You're not trying to. They're showing technical excellence. You're about to show them something real, something human. Well, you know what I mean. I'm terrified. What if I freeze up out there? What if my chair malfunctions again? What if I forget the choreography? Then you improvise. Lyra, listen to me. Jake crouched down so they were eye to eye. In about 5 minutes, you're going to go out on that floor. And yeah, some people are hoping you fail. Some people want to see you embarrass yourself so they can feel justified in their prejudice. But there are also people out there who need to see you succeed. People who've been told their whole lives that they are not good enough, that they are broken, that they don't belong. You're dancing for them too. A stage manager appeared at the entrance. Princess Lyra, you're next. 2 minutes. Jake smiled and shook his head. I appreciate the offer, Your Majesty. I really do. But I'm good where I am. The galaxy needs diplomats and politicians, sure. But it also needs people who mop floors and take out trash and see everyone as equal regardless of their job title. That's where I can do the most good. The Empress studied him for a long moment, then nodded with something that might have been respect. The galaxy could use more janitors like you, Jake Morgan. As she walked away, Lyra appeared around the corner, her hoverchair moving quickly. She threw her arms around Jake in a fierce hug. You changed my life, she said. You changed everything. No, Jake corrected gently. You changed your own life. I just taught you a few dance moves. The courage to use them? That was all you. Jake walked back through the palace corridors that night, mop and bucket in hand, humming that same old Earth tune. Tomorrow he'd be back to cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. But tonight, he'd helped one person believe in themselves. And sometimes, that's enough to change the world.